G'day and welcome to Does It Matter? You know, I was reflecting the other day on when I was a child, how different my mentality was to much of the rest of my life, and why my mentality today and for the last few years has been much closer to the mentality that I had as a child, and the way that I felt, the way that I experienced life. I was never in misery as a child for very long. Never. Um, I had a lot of severe abuse, and I mean severe abuse, in the home and outside the home. And there were a whole bunch of reasons for that, which I won't go into because it's not the purpose of the video. Um, but I, I shook it off. I was a happy chap. I was constantly looking forward to things, constantly dreaming. A lot of it is still a dreamer to this day, which is good. Constantly dreaming, reading science fiction, fantasy, history, loved history, constantly involved in sports, constantly doing things, having adventures, riding my bike, going to the creek. Like, I'd shrug off a beating like it was nothing from anyone, you know. And there were numerous candidates during most of my childhood. And just get on with things. I shrugged them off like a duck shrugs off water. I really did. My childhood was a very hard one in some respects, and yet I remember it as being very largely happy. Like, I don't have many memories of it being miserable, and yet I know it was at times, but that's not my experience of it. And the way that I looked at the world then protected me. It kept me safe from a lot of the things that were happening. And it was a lesson that I did not learn as a older teenager and young man. It's a lesson that I turned away from, and I really wish I hadn't. That the way you frame things is important, really, really important. It's not just what happens to you and what you're experiencing, but how you're choosing to see it has a huge impact on what's going to happen to you and what's going to happen to your mentality and your ability to function. I didn't know I was practicing the Stoic way, but I was. Um, Later on as a young man, I learned to be resentful, blame, projection, bitterness, and all that resilience that I built up as a child. It slowly drained away. It took a long time. I built up obviously reserve, but it drained away with my diminishing accountability. The less accountable I became for my feelings and thoughts and actions, and the less accountable I became for what I was in the end believing about myself and the world, the more I moved away from my stoic background, so to speak. Fortunately, I'm once again the integrated beast that I'm supposed to be. I'm far from perfect. That's it. But I'm what I am. I'm at peace with my shadow. It serves me. I don't serve it. I'm not afraid. There are things that worry me. There are things that concern me. There are things that very temporarily frighten me. I mean, if you jump out at me, you'll startle me. But I just don't live in fear. I don't. I just let it go because it's pointless. I don't feel like a fraud anymore. And I did feel, and I think a lot of people, it seems one of the most common things in therapeutic circles that I've been reading about is that a lot of people walk around feeling like a fraud. Very successful people too. And I think that is a sign of poor integration. Jung and many psychotherapists would agree that that is generally a sign of poor integration, that aspects of you are not linking up with other aspects of you in a smooth and functional way. So you're not entirely functional, and you're just waiting for a banana peel to slip on. You're just waiting for the right trigger to mess you up, and it will happen eventually, sooner or later. It left me reflecting on how children are often warped from their natural resilience as they grow by accepting the sort of religious, ideological, and cultural claims of their peers and family. Like, we generally absorb that in our headlong rush for identity and a place as teenagers and young folk. We often lose our core self and we slavishly absorb the messages and beliefs of those around us, both pro and con. And if those beliefs aren't pragmatic and balanced, they're going to wreck you eventually. And they're certainly going to whittle away any resilience that you've built. Kids are naturally optimistic. They're naturally happy and think positively towards the next positive thing. I think the sense of time is different. They perceive time much more slowly, and so hovering on misery is going to be much worse for them in some respects, in that respect, than it is for us. So my suspicion is that there's a protective element within child psychology that enables children to skate very quickly away from misery, because I think then they're intrinsically aware that it's going to harm them if they stay there for long. It's going to damage them. And in some cases it does. Some kids are unable to do this for a variety of reasons, far too complex for this particular video. But a lot of kids don't. And again, there are certain mysteries relating to human consciousness that are far from thoroughly plumbed as to why some people get PTSD in the same traumas and others don't, why some people shake off PTSD in a matter of months and others keep it for decades. And then what triggers that, it's often quite individuated, unique to the particular individual, which is why a good therapist is essential to work all that stuff out. I think kids also have faith and trust. They're natural optimists. And certainly this needs tempering as they enter the world, but all too often it's almost entirely lost due to the surrounding cultural pressure and familial pressure and peer pressure. And they're either crushed and become insecure, overtly insecure, or they respond with egocentrism as a compensatory projection, and push outwards and develop arrogance and fixed, rigid beliefs and so on, because that's a way of compensating for the crushing pressure of all these competing claims for your attention and consciousness and belief and adherence and obedience. I think the Stoics' path is mythic in orientation. It's the hero's journey, which seems to me to appeal to the child in us. It appeals to the child. It's close to what the children already experience. It embraces the struggles and hardships of the real world while engaging in the hero's mythic, wonderful, mystical journey. It's the integration of opposites, as Jung so saliently pointed out, that makes us resilient and at our best. And I think children often naturally do this. They also carry the seeds of their its eventual dissolution as they grow, because they're still getting messages from people. There's still some indoctrination, and there's also experiences that can happen that are quite shattering as well. The Stoic embraces the hero's journey for themselves as they grow and battles their demons, formerly hidden in the child's protective mind. So as we grow and we become teenagers, we have to reintegrate, rebuild ourselves, redefine our mentality. And as a teenager and a young person, you're constantly in search of that identity for yourself. It's something that a lot of postmodern woke groups, so to speak, have taken advantage of, deifying the search for identity, to the point where many of the elements of character that make the search for identity meaningful are gone. It's all about what color your hair is, how you feel about your reproductive parts, where you are relative to others, whether your identity is consistent with your existing beliefs as if they will never change. It's insanity. That's a bit of a tangent for another video. But we're meant to integrate that aspect of ourselves, reintegrate these new beliefs, reintegrate these new experiences, and try to maintain that almost that childlike state of belief in ourselves, belief in the ultimate goodness of life, while accepting and embracing the hardships of it as well. And that's the adult part. That's the part the children shrug it off because they're protected to some degree by their parents, they're protected by life, by institutions, and they're protected by a deep optimism because they are nurtured and looked after. And the more nurtured and looked after a child is, they tend to be better at projecting that optimism around themselves as a protective shell. As an adult, you don't have that luxury. You have to reintegrate that into something a bit more pragmatic, a bit more practical. And we have to relearn that talent, as well as the discernment to know, when do I fight, when do I resist, when do I defy, and when do I accept? What is the time to do which? What can I change? What can't I change? What you can't change, accept. Doesn't mean you have to be happy about it. You have to accept it. And kids are really good at that. The child mind is really good at going, it resents for very short periods of time. Again, it's that time sense. I think it's too painful for them to exist in that horror of helplessness. They can't stay there for long. And because they are helpless, because everyone's making decisions for them, they pragmatically move on. As adults, because we have, to some degree, more agency, but we also have an illusion of agency that really doesn't exist to the degree that, for most of us anyway, that we'd like. It's easy for us to develop resentment, bitterness, twistedness, and that shatters us, that breaks us into pieces. And so there are parts of you that are optimistic and joyful and happy. There are parts of you that are bitter and twisted, and they split apart. They diverge as you get older until you're almost 2 or 3 or 4 different people, depending on the circumstances. The pieces of you that used to work together smoothly no longer do so. And that process of reintegration, which is the core of both Zen Buddhism and Stoicism, and it actually a deep foundation of many of the world's great philosophical and religious traditions, is abandoned. It has to be consciously, explicitly reintegrated into your life. It has to be explicitly accepted. I'm going to rebuild myself in an organic and healthy way, in a strong way. I'm going to become resilient. I'm not going to insist myself in a fortress of protection. No. Stay open. Stay open. Open to experience, open to ideas, and allow yourself to be hurt. If you're going to be hurt, you're going to be hurt. But be like Wolverine. Be like Wolverine. Accept the wounds, let them heal. And the more that you are willing to do that, I'm not saying walk into walls or, step on landmines. If you see a landmine, avoid it. If you see a wall, step around it. Okay, obvious dangers. But you can't avoid them all, and you have to accept that sometimes shit will go wrong. Be like a child in that manner. And I think that's what Jesus was talking about in the New Testament, when he said, you may only come to me and the Father through with the mind of a child. There's a lesson hidden in there, and I think that lesson is that we need some aspects of our child mind mated to the aspects that we learn as adults, and that integration is what makes us healthy. Doesn't make you perfect. You only have to look at me to see that. I'm far from perfect. I'm a terribly flawed individual, and I don't say that tritely. I am, but I'm pretty well integrated. I know who I am, I know what I am, I'm at peace with that, and I'm constantly working on it. That is ultimately the goal that we want to reach in our 20s and 30s, not like I did in my 40s. But ultimately, it'd be nice to live in a society where teenagers to young people in their 20s were already starting to reach this and grow into this. I dream about that. I dream about a society where we can integrate the shadow, integrate the various aspects of our experience into an organic whole earlier in life. It would change the landscape of the world we live in remarkably. It's why I'm no longer focused on my activism and all the things I've spent most of my life on, because I realize that we change the world one person at a time within ourselves, and that the world is only ever really changed by individuals. It's changed by individuals. It's not changed by groups. Groups are made up of individuals who decide to function in a particular way. And the most powerful individuals are the integrated individuals, the ones at peace with themselves, the ones that can make shit happen when it needs to and accept when it can't. Okay, and be at peace, be solid, be like a rock when you need to be like a rock, and be like a tidal wave when you need to be like a tidal wave. Thanks for that, guys. Remember your child mind, embrace it, employ it, integrate it with the rest of you. Oos.